Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, chapter 9, text number 6. So we'll do the word for word first. Yata Akasha Stita Nityam Vayu Sarvatra Ga Mahan Tata Sarvani Bhutani Majstani Upadaraya. Sorry, I missed one word. Iti. Okay. Yatakashas Tito Nityam Vayu Sarvatra Go Mahan Tata Sarvani Bhutani Majtani Tya Upadaraya Yatakasha Stito Nityam Vayu Sarvatra Go Mahan Tata Sarvani Bhutani Majtanitya Upadaraya Yatakasha Stito Nitya Vayu Sarvatra Go Maha Tata Sarvani Bhutani Majtanitya Upadaraya. No need to. Majtanitya Upadaraya Yatakasha Stito Nityam Yatakasha Stito Nityam Vayu Sarvatra Go Maha Tata Sarvani Bhutani Majtani Tya Upadaraya Yatakasha Stito Nityam Vayu Sarvatra Go Maha Tata Sarvani Bhutani Majtani Tya Upadaraya. Mataji's? Okay. So we'll do the word for word. Yata, just as. Akashastita, situated in the sky. Nityam, always. Vayu, the wind. Salvatraga, blowing everywhere. Mahan, great. Tata, similarly. Sarvani Bhutani, all created beings. Matstani situated in me. Iti, thus. Upadaraya, try to understand. The translation, understand that as the mighty wind blowing everywhere, rest always in the sky, all created beings rest in me. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. For the ordinary person, it is almost inconceivable how the huge material creation is resting in Him. But the Lord is giving an example which may help us to understand. The sky may be the biggest manifestation we can conceive. And in that sky, the wind or air is the biggest manifestation. In the cosmic world, the movement of the air influences the movement of everything. But although the wind is great, it is still situated in the sky. The wind is not beyond the sky. Similarly, all the wonderful cosmic manifestations are existing by the supreme will of God. And all of them are subordinate to that supreme will. As we generally say, not a blade of grass moves without the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Thus, everything is moving under His will. By His will, everything is being created. Everything is being maintained. And everything is being annihilated. Still He is aloof from everything, as the sky is always aloof from the activities of the wind. In the Upanishads, it is stated, Yad Bishavata Pavate. It is out of fear of the Supreme Lord that the wind is blowing. This is from the Taittiriya Upanishad 281. And then the verse from the Brihad Aranyakya Upanishad. I'll just read the English translation. By the order of the supreme, by the supreme order under the superintendence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the moon, the sun, and the great planets are moving. In the Brahma Samhita, it is also stated, Ya chakshur esa savita sakala grannam, raja samasta surar mutir asesa teja, yasa yagya brahmati sambrita kalu chakro, govindam aripurusham tamaham bhajami. Thus, this is a description of the movement of the sun. It is said that the sun is considered to be one of the eyes of the Supreme Lord, and that it has immense potency to diffuse heat and light. Still it is moving in its prescribed orbit by the order of the supreme will of Govinda. So from Vedic literature, we can find evidence that this material manifestation, which appears to us very wonderful and great, is under the complete control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This will be further explained in the later verses of this chapter. Just a minute. So how many of you are coming for the first time here to the temple? Is there anybody here coming for the first time? Oh, there's quite a few of you. Okay. Have you read this book, Bhagavad Gita? What do you think of it? Good. Okay. So we're discussing the chapter that's a little technical, but the heart of the Bhagavad Gita. It's chapter 9. It's the middle. And chapter 9, just to paraphrase till we come to today's verse, it's dealing with the most confidential knowledge. Because in chapter 8, Krishna discusses an unalloyed devotee, a devotee who's not mixed. Like, we're coming from, I guess you're all coming from Indian backgrounds, and you'll maybe engage in some sort of worship. But wherever it may not be that you're exclusively worshiping Krishna. So chapter 8 end up with unalloyed. Unalloyed means it's not mixed. Alloy is pure, but when it's, unalloyed, but when alloy is mixed, different metals, it is different. You don't get it's not the same thing. So Krishna is speaking about that type of devotee in the 8th chapter. So when he moves on to the 9th chapter, he specifically gives knowledge, a confidential knowledge of yoga. It's very confidential. And sometimes you may not grip it. Like I come from South Africa, and when Srila Prabhupada went to South Africa, he spoke to a professor, Olivier, in a university. The Professor Olivier, and Prabhupada was sticking to the point of the Gita. There was a talk, and every 2 days a week we go to that campus where Prabhupada came, and we use the same room to give Krishna consciousness. But the professor, amongst many Indian people who were present, the professor got the message that this is a very important book. But he was a white man. He was an Afrikaner man. And he got this message, Professor Olivier. We can talk about him later. But I'm just making the point that you may not get this knowledge if you're not attentive and if you're really not desiring it. So this is very confidential. Like when you're discussing something confidential, do you discuss it with everybody? No. So this is what the 9th chapter is about. So then in those chapters, in this chapter, there's like about 5 sections. I will just quickly run into those 5 sections. The first section from 1 to 3 is dealing with hearing, just hearing about Krishna, qualifications and disqualifications. Then the next few verses from 4 to 10 is discussing Krishna's relationship to the material world, which we will discuss now in the 6th verse, how he pervades everything. And then he discusses from 11 to 25 how fools neglect bhakti. Fools. They neglect because people think, what these people are doing bhakti? It's such a simple process. So fools, Krishna says in the Gita, in the 9th chapter, text number 11, right? Avajananti mam mudha. Fools deride me when I descend in this human form. And the divine don't. So that's from 11 to 25 and 26 to 34, the glories of devotional service to Krishna. So we're going to be discussing, but we have to go a little back because this verse itself is dealing with clarifying something from the 4th verse onwards. Because if you go to the 4th verse, if you go to the 4th verse, so when you go to the 4th verse, we'll look at the English translation. It says, by me in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. Is it you reading it? All beings are in me, but I'm not in them. All beings are in me, but I'm not in them. And then he goes on to the next verse, in the 5th verse, he says, and yet everything is created does not rest in me. Behold my mystic opulence. Although I am the maintainer of all living entities, and although I'm everywhere, I am not part of this cosmic manifestation, for myself is the very source of creation. So when you look at those 2 verses, there is an apparent contradiction, isn't it? It's contradicting it. So the Acharya says that these, Baladev Vidyabhusan says this is an apparent contradiction because first he says, all beings are in me, and now he says the opposite, and yet everything is created does not rest in me. So, but the key of that verse is it mentions Yogam Aishwaryam, if you look at that, mystic opulence. So it's mystical. It's inconceivable. Now, what is the meaning of inconceivable? What does it mean? What does it mean? Inconceivable. You cannot conceive it in your, it's beyond your jurisdiction of your mind to perceive and conceive. That's what it is. You cannot know it. But Krishna says this is mystical. But for Krishna, everything rests on him. It's not a burden to him. It's not, as the acharyas explain it, it does not present even the smallest burden for him. He maintains, it says, he maintains all that exists while remaining completely separate and detached in the spiritual world. So it's happening simultaneously. But if you don't understand this word inconceivable, this won't make much sense to you. So therefore, we have to understand that point of inconceivable. That is beyond our perception, we have to accept. Like many things we accept, right? But you're all coming from Bharat, we are foreigners, you're all coming from this land of Bharat. You all accept scripture, at least many of them do. At least that's my understanding from the people I meet. And you all can understand this point. So therefore, to understand this point of inconceivable, Krishna speaks this verse that we read today. And this verse today is talking about all living entities are within Krishna, are dependent on Krishna, and are supported by Krishna. But nevertheless, they act independently. So how can somebody who is dependent act independently? That is an important point to know. So this is what we're talking about, the inconceivable feature of the relationship between the living entities and Krishna. So Krishna is providing an analogy for us to understand it. And what is that analogy? He's talking about the sky. So the example given is that like the sky is like an upside down bowl. The bowl, you have a bowl, and if you hold the bowl the other way around, and inside contains the wind. So in that way, in the same way, all created being rests in me within that bowl. So just as the sky is detached from the wind, though in the sky blows freely and independently. That makes sense, right? It's blowing freely, but it's still restricted to the sky. It's still restricted. So we have to have that under the sky restricts only the area of movement, but not the movement itself. It works like that. So Krishna thus limits the activities of the conditioned living entities, regardless of the extent of their power, to the circumference of the material world. Just like within the material sphere, they are free. And Krishna is detached from them independently enacted activities and from the reaction of their activities that are generated. Just like the person is acting independently and he may engage in some sinful activities, but those reactions he gets. That's quite understandable. You understand that, right? So you get reactions. So if, for example, if you're eating meat, you're all vegetarians, right? Not yet. Veg, non-veg. Okay, whatever. But that's the point. I mean, if you engage in that sinful act, then you're bound to get some reaction for it. Now, when somebody gets that reaction, we will talk later about whose responsibility it is. So we are speaking about dependency on Krishna, being fully dependent in Krishna and independent of him simultaneously. Now, when we look at this, this is inconceivable. Krishna is talking about his mystic opulence that is inconceivable. It becomes conceivable by this analogy. It makes it conceivable. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur speaks about it, and he speaks about how it becomes conceivable. Just like when you look at wind and the sky, they are both matter, not spirit, right? So if both are matter, there's only one person who is spiritual. So there's that one person is Krishna. So the other two elements that we're talking about, the analogy he gave, is talking about matter. So the only remaining factor is Krishna. So Krishna is the Supreme Lord. And that is something that we must cultivate. Because as we develop, Krishna's, we understand his supremacy, we hear more about him, then we become less envious when we hear more about him, then revelation takes place. Envy. What is your definition of envy? What is your definition? Yeah, that's a good point. You don't have that mic, huh? Can you say it again?
Hey Krishna. Prabhuji, when we want something like material, mobile, anything, when we don't get it, but others get it, so we become envious of others.
Okay, but Srila Prabhupada gave a very interesting example of envy. And he spoke about you don't like somebody. That's his definition. When you're not liking somebody, that means envy. And not liking somebody must not be directed to the devotees. That's envy. And envy is a quality that, we should, as we become free, so these subject matter become more and more clearer, maybe a little technical. Now we can understand that how this is inconceivable becomes conceivable. And we'll look at a few verses earlier on that was discussed in chapter 5, and I'll just try to pick it up. Let me get to that. We can discuss some other points. Yeah. Yeah. We're talking about being the doer. Because here it's talking about, the purport was talking about, not a blade of grass move without the sanction of Krishna. And if that's the case, then everything is sanctioned by Krishna, whether it's good or bad. And that's true. But these two verses, as given in the 5th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, and I'll read it, this English translation. The embodied spirit, master of the city of his body, does not create activities, meaning the living entity, the jiva, does not create activities, nor does he induce people to act, nor does he create fruits of action. All this is enacted by the modes of nature. So who is the doer? The modes of nature. So then you will blame, hey, not me, it's the modes of nature. But then he speaks the next verse, knowing that, okay, But before that, then Then the next question will arise: who controlled the modes of material nature? Who? The supersoul, Krishna, the supersoul. Then we shift the blame to the supersoul. I'm not doing it, so Krishna is doing it. But then Krishna clarifies that. He clarifies that by saying, well, then this is the 15th verse in the 5th chapter. He says, nor does the Supreme Lord assumes anyone's sinful or pious activities. Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of ignorance which covers their real knowledge. So if you're ignorant, your knowledge is covered, you'll engage in sinful activities and you will get a reaction. It's very straightforward, right? That's very straightforward. Just like, the first understanding we should have, we are not the body. And I was talking about that professor earlier on. Srila Prabhupada was driving that verse, Dehini asmin yata dehe kaumaram yavanam jara, tata dehantra praptis dhiras tattanamoyate. He was hammering that verse and he was making that person understand, as the embodied soul continuously passes into the body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. So first understanding is that. And you'd wonder why he spoke so much about this. And as devotees, we've been hearing this for many times. You're not the body. Hey, Prabhu, you're not the body. You're spirit soul. And we're tired of hearing this thing. The fact that you get tired of hearing this, you're in the bodily concept of life. Because if you realize that point, you won't get tired. Is that not true? Is that true? So it's like that. So then, although the super soul is the ultimate controller, he is not responsible for the living entity activities or the reactions they get. And in that particular verse itself, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada quotes some interesting scriptures. He says, the Lord engages the living entity in pious activities so he may be elevated. The Lord engages him in impious activities so he may go to hell. The living entity is completely dependent in his distress and happiness. By the will of the Supreme, he can go to heaven or hell as a cloud is driven by the air. So this verse is talking about desire. And it's important because sometimes we forget, we think we're the doer. And as you advance in Krishna consciousness, you have to come out of that bodily concept of life, one. And even when you in an institution, especially if you hold positions and you think, well, I'm a temple president, I'm a GBC, I'm this and I'm that. You actually also have to come out of that before you enter the spiritual world. Because in the spiritual world, they don't have these things. You can't say, well, I'm the temple president of Juhu temple. You can't do that. Isn't it? Oh, as one devotee commented, you can't say I'm the GBC because Yoga Maya is in control there. You get it? So it's very interesting. So the Lord, we have to understand these points, that I'm not the doer. And then that controlling mentality will go away. That controlling mentality. And that controlling mentality is very difficult to give up. Because even amongst friends, there's control. We're trying to control the other person. But Krishna says in the Gita, the 5th chapter, text 29, what is it verse? Bhoktaram Yagya.
Hare Krishna. Bhuktaram yagya tapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram suradam sarvabhutanam jnatva mam shantirichyati.
What's the translation? In essence, everything is controlled by Krishna. Krishna is your best well-wishing friend. The point is, he's the best well-wisher. Prabhupada always signed his letters, your ever well-wisher. So he's your best friend, Krishna, because he will not let you down in any situation. He's traveling with you as Paramatma in your heart, in this body, throughout his lifetime. And even if you go to a lower species of life, even if you become a dog or a cat, he's still there with you. He's your best friend. And sometimes we try to manipulate people and we think we're doing them, we are their best friends. But there's always some motivation. So that controlling mentality doesn't help us to understand Krishna. Because Krishna is number one and we are next, the living entities. But he's got many, many other devotees. But that understanding about, I wanted to make that point about getting reaction for your sin. So just take for example what you're sinning in. You don't have to tell me. You just take that and when you go home tonight, meditate that I want to give up this bad habit. 4 things we don't do. We don't eat meat, we don't gamble, we don't take intoxication, and we don't engage in illicit sex. 4 things. So these 4 rules are important. And it's not difficult for people from Bharat to follow. It's talking about pious people. It's talking about you. You're all here. We coming from somewhere else. Talking about you. The scriptures is talking about Bharat. The scriptures, I always quote this example of in the 5th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, all the devatas are looking at the people in Bharat as very pious. Even the most sinful fellow. But he's pious. That's why he takes birth here in Bharat. So it's your culture, you have to follow this, strictly follow it. Like that. There's so much to say on this. But it just reminds me of Gauranga Prabhu was one of his clips. He was talking about the doer. And he said how he was on a train, and in the train you can get a free body massage, I think, there's so many people, you'll be like stuck with so many people. So he was stuck and he had his bag of books, Bhagavad Gita. So one man came and said, I want Bhagavad Gita. And now how can he give him Bhagavad Gita? His hands is stuck, somebody is here, somebody is this side, the bag is down. So he said, okay, you look at that bag, open that zip, take out the book, put the money here, 120 rupees or whatever, put it inside here. The man took out the book, he had to get change, so he said, take the change, and he purchased the book. He said the first time he realized he's not the doer. In such a position, he was able to give Krishna. So, you have to understand that Krishna, you can blame the modes of material nature, you can blame the super soul, but ultimately you are doing things which you're going to get reaction for. So just be careful who you blame. So like this text is dealing with that subject matter. We have a little more time. 5 minutes more. Okay, then we'll stop here. Then we'll just take some questions, right? Oh, yes.
Hare Krishna Swamiji. Hare Krishna Swamiji. Could you repeat the 4 things that you just said right now to give up any habit? The one that you said, meditate at night and follow these 4 things.
Oh, the 4 things.
Yeah.
No gambling, no intoxication, no illicit sex, and no meat eating.
Okay.
You can follow that?
Yeah, definitely. Why not?
Good. You've been practicing a little bit?
I already do that. But
You
I'll
already do
practice it
that,
hard.
good. So those 4 things, if you give up, and not difficult for you to give up. Is it difficult? No. All of you following, right? It's good. I always ask the crowd whether they're following these things. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah. So this verse, which we discussed, how Krishna's, and I have a few minutes, right? So, you want to say something? You can say. Oh, translating in Hindi. Okay. Yeah. Just like when you look at Maria Yashoda, she's such a beautiful lady, and but at one point, she sees the universal form of of creation, the universal form. She sees everything, and she even sees herself within it. But actually, it's not in Krishna's mouth; it's actually in Krishna's belly. Seeing everything. And in the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, that form, and I'll just pick it up. Just 1 minute. I just want to conclude with that. It's just so interesting. 11:8, because just like Krishna is saying, he's saying, Arjuna, but you cannot see me with your present eyes. Therefore, I give you divine eyes. Behold my mystic opulence. So, already Krishna, Arjuna is seeing Krishna. He's already seeing Krishna. But the universal form is different from, the pastimes of the human-like pastimes of Krishna, like he has with Maria Yashoda. It's different. So the vision that we're talking about, where he sees the universal form, some acharyas say, it's like the example they use, it's like you're tasting crystal sugar as compared to the taste of unrefined gur or sugarcane. So when you're seeing the Virat form, it's like that unrefined gur. So therefore, he's given that divine vision, because naturally he's seeing Krishna. So that's a very, interesting point, but there's more to it, but you can't go. We don't have much time. But, you can also see Krishna. Like if you ask a child, where is Krishna? He's on the altar there. Innocently he'll tell you it's on the altar, because that's Krishna. So take it more seriously. There's more to say on this. Next time we can talk again. But we leave tomorrow for South Africa. And interestingly, that professor that got this, he was the only person amongst many Indians, as a white man, he got this message. So when we were opening the temple in South Africa, we invited him. And he came and he gave a talk on Prabhupada, what he was saying on the Bhagavad Gita. Then another devotee told me that some years later, he was gone very old. He came to India and went to Mayapur, and he went to Prabhupada's quarters, the Samadhi Mandir, and he was standing and overlooking the Ganges. Can you imagine? Just a little association with Prabhupada had taken him that long. So it's very, very interesting, this Krishna consciousness, and very scientific. The Bhagavad Gita is presented very scientifically, systematically. That's why I was telling you all the divisions, how everything is discussed in a very systematic manner. So we'll say thank you very much if there's no more questions. And we'd like to But I'll be around here if you need to ask anything or find out about us. We could talk about it. Is it okay? But this is a very beautiful temple. Not much more to say, but you'll finish at 8:30, right? What's the time now? 8:20. 8:26. I got 4 minutes. So I wanted, I wanted to talk about the different levels of realization, like the verse 1 to 11 of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1. What is it? What 1 to 11? Vedanti Tattva Vidas Tattvatam Jnanam Avyayam Brahmatmi Paramatmi Bhagavan Iti Sabhadyate. So those learned transcendentals, they give the 3 phases of Godhead: Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. 3 features. Just like Indian people always talk about becoming one with God. But that when you become one with God, you can do that. You actually commit suicide. You enter into the ray of the Lord. Just like you have the sun, but you enter the ray. And when you enter the ray, you remain there for a long time. But there is a possibility of you going back to Godhead from that point. From Brahman platform back to the spiritual world, as Prabhupada would say it. But then also, that is becoming one with God. But what happens generally, 99.9% of the time, you will fall down because you get lonely. And loneliness is not good. Just like when you're alone, that's one thing. But when you're with people and you're alone, that's worse. That's worse. Isn't it? Some people are lonely being with people also. That's worse. So when you enter Brahman, you fall down after a while. But then you can take to Paramatma realization. That's also partial. So what Hindus do, when they do some of these things, they are partially worshipping Krishna. But then the Bhagavan feature, where they fully worship Krishna. So that's different. And where Krishna is playing the flute, when the curtain open, you're going to see Krishna with his flute. So that form of Krishna you should worship. Hare Krishna. So thank you very much. Hare Krishna. So you can have Arti.
It was